Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, introducing this bonus episode that we have coming out this week. Now, most of the time we're talking about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, but this week we have a special interview with the author of one of our recent book club picks, Dr. Patricia McConnell, who's written many, many books about dogs, but specifically the book we discussed was The Other End of the Leash. Now, for those of you who've joined us on Patreon, you've hopefully already gotten a chance to listen to our full 2-hour discussion of The Other End of the Leash. If you haven't joined us on Patreon, well, that's okay. That's fine. You probably heard a small preview of our full-length discussion. Now, if you liked that and haven't listened to the full thing, might I suggest you go over to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track to subscribe so you can get the full length episode. The full thing will come out in the free feed, but that'll be a little bit of a while. And that might give you some good background information to really fully enjoy this discussion with Dr. Patricia McConnell, who's a certified animal behaviorist and very celebrated trainer of dogs and a treater of dogs with serious aggression. Now, even if you haven't listened to the full episode, you're not a huge fan of dogs, I think you'll find that there's a lot of interesting discussion about, what is behavior and how do different folks in different fields learn about and utilize principles of behavior for treatment, whether it's for human organisms or other animals like dogs or other primates as well. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview with Dr. Patricia McConnell. So we are very honored to be speaking with Dr. Patricia McConnell today. We just finished doing, for some of you might have heard our book club, The Other End of the Leash, author of that, as well as many other books. But we're very excited to be talking to Dr. Patricia McConnell. Patricia, thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
So kind of to start off, Jackie knows you very well from all of your works. I don't own a dog, so I'm a little behind, but I did love Other End of the Leash. Looking at your website, you have a farm. You've done, in the book you mentioned all the herding trials you've done your talk show. You had a TV show you mentioned. Is there anything with animals that you kind of haven't done that you've been itching to do? Because it feels like you've hit all the quadrants. Yes,
there are. Here are two of them anyway. I'm sure there are more, but here's two that come to mind. One, I would like to win a herding dog trial. I am not a novice. I'm now an intermediate. I'm now running in the open class with one dog, which is you run against professionals. It's like you might be playing against, Rafa Nadal, kind of thing. And I've done okay. And, I've gotten some seconds and thirds and fourths, but I would like to win one. Just would. And the other thing is I want to finish my mystery novel, which has a lot of dogs in it.
Okay.
So I'm working on, I'm there, many months will go by when I don't touch it, like right now, when it's dogs, garden, dogs, garden. But yeah, I'm going to get back to it when fall comes. And anyway, so those are the two things that come to mind.
Okay. A mystery novel about dogs.
Is the mystery novel real life mystery?
What do you mean real life mystery?
Like, was there like a real life dog mystery, or is it like you've made up the mystery?
It's fiction.
Ooh,
it's total fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. Somebody dies in the first chapter.
Ooh, you gotta get right to that, right to the mystery, right? Oh, excellent. Well, okay. Well, we'll keep our eyes open for that.
Yeah,
hopefully that'll be coming out. Great.
Thanks.
So, Dr. McConnell, we're and our listeners are mostly board certified behavior analysts. So we practice applied behavior analysis with humans. You are a certified animal behaviorist, which sounds very similar, but I know they are not the same job. You also have a doctorate in zoology. What is that process like? Like, are you required to know a little bit about every single animal out there? Do you have a specialty in terms of which areas you know the most about? And are there sort of like general principles that these are good for most of the animals out there? I mean,
no, those are great questions. Yeah, to be a certified applied animal behaviorist, which is through the Animal Behavior Society, there's a board certification committee, which is made up of people who are certified. And so the process, and people can go if they're interested, they might want to check it out. Go to the Animal Behavior Society website and go to applied. And the qualifications are you need a really good background in the behavioral and biological sciences. I think you need at least 30 credits in behavior related, which can include, obviously psychology and ethology, wildlife ecology, behavioral physiology, behavioral development, primate behavior. You're right. So a really good background in a range of our understanding of behavior, because behavior is so complicated. I mean, what other field involves, if you want to really understand behavior, what other field involves genetics, evolution, physiology, cognition, early development, everything about learning, et cetera, right? So that's required. To be certified, you also need a certain number of years of experience working with clients. And in terms of your question about how specific is the knowledge, so much of what's needed, as you all know, I think, is universal. So many of the principles of learning are universal. So a lot of it is very much universal principles of developmental psychology, behavioral physiology, et cetera. But I mean, if you're just going to work with horses, you really better have worked with horses, right, to be certified. Because there are, as I talked about in the other end of the leash, there are these behavioral predispositions. There are genetically mediated behavioral predispositions and filters of what is salient, what is not salient, that are really important to know. So the other end of the leash is a lot about that specifically. It's about who are we as primates, who are dogs as canines, and how does that both enhance our relationship and how does that interfere with it?
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess, since you brought up the other end of the leash, one of the things that I am always curious about when I pick up a book is sort of like, what is the book trying to tell me? And while I think I know the answer to this, I know, sort of when I talked with some other people, when I was sort of, looking at some of the reviews online, the question becomes, this book, I didn't learn how to make my dog sit reading this book.
Right.
I don't think that was the point of the book, but would you consider the other end of the leash a training book, something totally different, a complement to a training program? Like, where do you see it fitting in sort of the dog literature pantheon?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. So the answer is, first, no. It is not a training book in that it will teach your dog how to sit. However, really, at essence, it's a book about behavior. And it's a book about how our behavior is similar and different, as I was saying earlier, to dogs, and how that can mess up our communication sometimes. So will it teach you to be better at teaching your dog to sit? Yes, it will. That my main purpose, Rob, is my mission in life is to improve relationships between people and other animals. That's my passion. That's my mission. That's what everything I've done professionally has worked towards. And so, at essence, that's what it is. It's a book about behavior. It's designed to help improve the relationship between you and your dog. And will it help you teach your dog to sit? Yeah, it will. And here's an example. So many of us, because we're human, so speech oriented, right? Think about sounds. We think about speech. So when people say sit, they're focused on the noise that comes out of their mouth. And your dog is watching you. So most of us, when we say sit, move our body in some way. And it turns out that visual signals are more salient to dogs. So the visual signal usually overrides the acoustic signal. It's not that dogs can't learn them. Of course they can. But how many times have you asked, for example, dog owners, not you, obviously, but, ask your dog to do something that the dog knows, right? He knows it. And company is there. And you say sit, and your dog doesn't sit. And it's like, I know, he knows that. Well, the company changed your behavior. So the dog thinks sit, that the signal to sit is your head going down. In my case, it was when I would call my dogs to me, and then I would do this little, what am I going to tell them to do now?
I do the same thing.
You do.
Yes, I do it with the same hand, and I noticed it after reading the other end of the leash and taking data on my own behavior. I knew I did this, and I went,
I love it. Right. That's what we do. So you call them to come, and you go, what am I going to say now? And often I would say sit. So this became their sit signal, but I didn't know it, right? Just like you, right? So can it help you teach your dog and train your dog better? Yes, it really, really can. Is it a training book? No, it's not.
I know you have a bunch of other training books as well. So
yeah.
Now, in developing Other End of the Leash, so certainly hearing about your mission, and I think that came through very nicely in the book, that kind of bridging the gaps and how can we better understand and learn to live with our dogs and work with our dogs and play with our dogs. What was the research process like? Because like you said, it's not a book where, here's how to sit, here's how to lay down. You were really pulling in so many sources, and not all of them from dogs, but a lot of other primates, bonobos. I know bonobo behavior came up a lot of times, chimpanzee behavior. Was that process like, it was just information you had after all your years, studying, and you just were able to put it down, or you had to stop and go research a type of animal? Like, how did that all come together?
Yeah, I did do a lot of research, but that's what I did. That's what you learned. One of the things you learned to do in graduate school, right? So, being in graduate school in zoology, working on my dissertation, being involved in the Animal Behavior Society, seeing research talk after research talk, study after study after study. If you don't learn how to do research, you probably don't deserve your doctorate, right? So I knew already sort of a lot of places to go. Like I work with primates. One of the things I did in graduate school is I work with these wonderful little small South American primates called cotton-top tamarins. And I also took primate behavior and development. So I had a lot of background in primate behavior, which I did not realize how much it would serve me and how much it would actually help me. And I literally, Rob, I was literally at a dog training class. I had gotten the whole idea for this book as I had graduated. I had started my business as a behaviorist and trainer. I had started doing classes because all the classes were punishment-based. And they were sending me all these clients with aggression problems. So dogs were defending themselves from being attacked, basically. So I actually started my own classes. I didn't really expect to. I didn't really even want to, although that became a wonderful thing. And so I literally started noticing that people were talking while their dogs were watching, and people didn't know what they were doing. And at one point, at many points, people repeat themselves when their dog doesn't sit, just to use that as an example. So sit, 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 right? And all I could think about was these videos I'd seen over and over and over again of chimpanzees going, ooh, 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 ooh. And then somebody had a leash and they were jerking on the leash. And I thought of this video of this chimp, this male chimp, like thrashing this branch around. And I was like, oh my God. And that's where it started, literally. So that's where it started. So research now would be a very different thing, right? In some ways, it'd be a lot easier. I mean, this was a million years ago. This was 2000 minus. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm literally in the library stacks, physically pulling out journals,
Oh, yeah, it does seem like it's a lot easier to access resources.
I had feet and feet and feet of printed out, studies. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well,
so we did.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, The Other End of the Leash, was written back in the early 2000s and started even a little before that in terms of the research process.
Right.
So given that span of time, is there anything, if you were to say do like the updated edition or the second edition, that you've learned about human behavior, dog behavior, that you're like, I could put like 5 more chapters all about X that you want to put in there?
Oh, wow. Yes. I've thought about that. And I find it daunting, but also sort of, there's parts of it that you feel like are dated and there are parts that aren't. So a lot of the beginning of the book, I should really read the book again from cover to cover. It's been a while. But if I remember correctly, a lot of the beginning of the book is, it's about visual signals, for example, and about how visual we are and how ironically tiny little visual signals have a huge impact on us, even though we may not even be conscious of it. But, we know that, the tiniest little lip curl or eyebrow lift has a huge effect on our evaluation of the message we receive from the signal sender, right? So a lot of that part of the book, I don't think it would change that much. I'm sure there'd be some updates of some fun new research that's come out about that. I think the parts that would be most different would be like, I'm thinking about the chapter, for example, later in the book, for example, I talk about personality. And I mean, there's so much now about sort of genetics and personality, about mutations, about like hypersociability, from, I can't think of Emily's last name, Emily Bray, did work on hypersociability and also on, all that work on whether dogs, wolves, primates pay attention to pointing or not, right? I just wrote a blog actually about that and how dogs appear to be predisposed to learn it really, really fast and are very, very attuned to getting signals from humans much more than many other mammals. There's so much great research on that. So so that part of the book I think would be different. I would love to, in another life, update that part of the book. But the general idea, I think, still has really solid legs. We're canines. We're canines. I love it. That would be another book.
Yeah.
The werewolf book.
There you go.
That would be another book. No, they don't like hugging, and we do because we're primates. A lot of that wouldn't change. That's going to be true forever.
Mm-hmm.
I was always curious, did you always want to work with dogs? When did you decide that you wanted to start your own dog business, and what were the steps that you took to start that and get there?
Sure. Yeah. So I always wanted to work with animals, always. When the family story, I think I remember the family story rather than the actual event, as people often do. When I was asked when I was 5, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to marry a rancher. Because in Phoenix, Arizona in 1953, there were no women doing, much of anything except making casseroles. So there was no chance you could even be a veterinarian, not even a veterinarian. I don't mean it that way. It was basically no opportunities except to marry somebody who had animals. As I got older, I got married really young, and I sort of spent a lot of time just trying to earn money to keep us alive. And when I went back to school, I knew I wanted to study animal behavior. I knew that was a risk. I knew there weren't a lot of jobs. I knew it was tricky. Figured I'd probably teach at some small college. But then I went to an Animal Behavior Society conference. By the way, there's one coming up in August that I'm sure you could listen to the lectures post. It's early August that people could listen to the lectures afterwards. Anyway, Animal Behavior Society. So I went to some conferences and I met a few people who were doing applied work, who were taking what they'd learned. Some were psychologists, some were zoologists, taking what they'd learned. And I had been working with primates at the time. I was working with these cotton-top tamarins in a lab. And I didn't want to go to Africa because at the time I had family here and I didn't want to leave there. And I realized I love hands-on stuff, and if you're working with wildlife, you really need to not do that, right? You need to avoid it. But I also realized my 2 favorite species are people and dogs. They just are. I love our species. They drive me insane sometimes. But we're just fascinating. We're just such I don't need to tell you guys, right? We're just such a fascinating species of animal. And I'm just gobsmacked in love with dogs. So I met somebody who was an applied animal behaviorist, and it was like, oh, I could do this. So after I graduated with my doctorate, a colleague who was in the same lab, Jeff Bayless's lab, Nancy Raffetto and I, knowing nothing about business, knowing a lot about animal behavior, opened up a business called Dog's Best Friend. And we went around to veterinarians. Now, I had border collies and was, working them on sheep. She had retriever gun dogs. So, we both had our feet sort of firmly planted in the real world of dogs too. And I did a lot of work volunteering, helping train dogs, et cetera. Anyway, so we started this business and we made no money whatsoever for a long period of time. But I hung in there, and basically it turned into a business with I hired another behaviorist consultant, and then I had dog training classes, and I had 23 trainers and volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. So it all sort of built on itself. And then I started teaching at the university and writing books and lecturing all around the world. And so there we are. So
I like that.
stamina.
Yeah, I imagine that may be a line of work I may want to do it someday.
Oh,
I agree.
wonderful.
Dogs and people are also my favorites.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Every couple months, Patricia, she says,
I do.
I'm getting out of teaching. I'm getting out of humans. It's all dogs from here on out.
Just send me an email, Jackie. Where
my kids got to grow up a little bit more. Then I can do some time. But yes, I have dreamt about it.
Yeah, and by the way, I was a freshman when I was 39. I mean, I went back to school at 39, so you got tons of time.
All right. That's good. That is good. I think that is always good to hear, Dr. McConnell, the idea of you can do a lot, even though we think of like, oh, freshman, what are you, 18? And you're older than 18, it's too old. Nope, not the case.
Yep, nope, never too late.
That is good to know. So if you could, you have magic wand time, if you could take one lesson that you feel this is the lesson. Everyone who owns a dog is thinking of owning a dog, has owned a dog in the past. I can magically make it, common knowledge that everybody does, no questions asked. I have a sense of sort of the general themes that you'd probably go at based on the book. But if there were one specific, grain, if you're able to break it down that way of knowledge, what would that be for all the dog owners and prospective dog owners out there related to, human and dog behavior, skill, anything?
I'm torn because I only get one and I want two.
You know what? It's fake, so you can have two, Trisha. It's fine.
But no, I'll tell you the first one, and it's shared. This is nothing novel. It is shared. All of my colleagues, every progressive trainer and certified applied animal behaviorist and veterinary behaviorist I know shares this, which is teaching people to read dogs, teaching people to understand subtle visual signals from dogs that they are uncomfortable. It would prevent, heaven only knows how many bites, millions of them. It would radically improve relationships. It would keep way more dogs out of shelters and in homes. It would that is the one thing that would make the biggest difference that any of us can think of. Dogs are so expressive. And as a colleague, I can't remember who it was. I apologize. This is, the hair and the memory, this color hair and memory, there's a correlation there, and it turns out to be inverse. But it was a great line by one of my colleagues who said, we need to stop waiting for dogs to yell at us. We need to be able to hear them whisper, and barking and growling are yells. The people screaming. It was Chirag Patel. That's who said it, Chirag Patel. And a whale eye, a look to the side where the head goes the other way, a closed mouth, just a, that's huge. If I'm reaching towards a dog and his mouth closes when I'm reaching, I pull my hand back. And if people just knew to look, and most people don't, they even though it's so ironic because we are so visual, and we should be brilliant at it. For some reason, we just have to learn. And once you learn, it's not rocket science at all. It's not that hard. If your dog turns his head away, it's like he's avoiding something, right? Anyway, so that's number one. Number two is I wish people would learn that your dog is watching you all the time. And every move you make means something to your dog, whether you know it or not. So if you call your dog to come and say, come, you've just stopped your dog. Mm-hmm. And people do that. It's just ubiquitous. So those are my two.
Well, I know I appreciate it, even though not a dog owner, but my brother owns a dog, my mother owns 2 dogs. So I've used a lot of the strategies for how do you get the dog to come versus stop. I know I've started doing that, and they probably find me annoying because I don't own a dog yet. I read the books and now I'm talking like, I know plenty of facts about dog behavior. I read a book once.
I'm a behavior analyst and I read a book.
Yeah, I don't know. Our field, the ABA field does get that a lot. Like, well, you read a book and you had some training. Like, congrats. Please don't.
Yeah.
Everything. I don't know. Is it like that in the certified animal behaviorist world? There's a couple people.
Well, there's a lot of that in dog training.
Mhm.
I've had dogs all my life, and and mostly what is scary is the phrase, is and it's always said in a particular way. It's like, dogs just love me. I have something special with dogs, and some people do.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong. Some people really do. But one, it doesn't mean you can work with serious aggression. Two, it doesn't mean you can work with the people, because that's 90% of it. And three, it may not be as special as you think it is. So, So, I mean, that's part of the reason for certification, is that right now anybody can call themselves a behaviorist. What does that really mean? Anybody can call themselves a trainer. What does that mean? That's why the Association of Professional Dog Trainers also has a certification process that I think is really, really important. So, I mean, you're familiar with all this, right? Everybody in your group knows how this goes, right? So,
yep,
we feel the same way in our field.
Yep.
Everyone can be called a behaviorist,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Or everyone can be called a behavior therapist, and it's not the same.
Right. I feel your pain.
So, Tricia, you have your mystery cooking. I know, looking at your website, you've recently written a memoir as well. So,
Yeah.
That must have been a very different process, right? From a research-based book to having to write about yourself.
Do you know anything about it? Have you read it?
I haven't had a chance to read it. No. I looked up. I saw on the website, because I was just looking at recent publications, because I knew that Other End of the List was a little bit older, and I saw certainly the specific dog training books and dealing with aggressive dogs. And then I noted it as one of the more recent things you've written, and I noticed it was very much about a dog who wasn't in, I don't believe was in Other End of the Leash, because
no, he wasn't. I didn't have him when I wrote that.
So it was not a dog I was familiar with, at least from the dogs that
right.
That you lived with in the book. And I saw it was a memoir, and it just seemed it was very different. So it really stuck out. But I haven't had a chance to look at it.
Yeah, it is. It is in one way, Rob. It's very similar in that. In The Other End of the Leash, I compared human and dog behavior sort of on a grand scale. In my second big book, For the Love of a Dog, I compared human and dog emotions. Mm-hmm. And for The Education of Will, part of what I did is compare trauma in people and dogs and other mammals. So in that sense, it's really similar. But in another sense, it was a profoundly different book because, as you said, it's a memoir. And so I talk about my trauma and my PTSD and the things that happened to me. I have no idea why Willie behaved the way he did. He came as a young puppy, as if he'd been in Afghanistan for 3 tours and had his best friends blown up in front of him. I mean, I don't mean to demean that. I actually almost regret. People forgive me for saying that, because I think some people who really went through that, I can't even imagine what that was really truly like. But he was exceedingly fearful and reactive of things as a relatively young dog. As I write in the book, he was a little puppy when I took him to his first vet visit, and there was a little tiny little white fluffball puppy, the cutest little dog ever, a little Bichon. And he saw it and literally was just terrorized. He was absolutely terrified of it. Now, where did that come from? So it was very different because it was, part of it was therapy for me. I talked about things I'd never talked about being raped and about having a man fall from 5 stories and literally land at my feet and die, which has a big effect on your brain. It completely changes your hippocampus. It changes your amygdala. It structurally actually changes the function and structure of your brain, when basically what it learns is you never know when something terrible is going to happen. So you always have to be ready for it, which is, of course, ironic, because what you learn is you can't ever be ready for it. Mm-hmm. Your brain is like, well, I have to be as ready as I can, right? So you become hypervigilant and hyper alert and, all the other symptoms of PTSD. And, I had a lot of that ideation. I was sort of constantly imagining horrible things happen and nightmares and fears. And it's a book about how this dog, Willie, my love, this dog I love so much. I lost him a few years ago. Mm-hmm. Willie actually was making me worse. This was not a therapy dog. So ironically, this is a dog who I started regressing because he'd hear a noise and he was, bah, 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 and I would jump off the floor while I was rubbing his belly and then get all terrified. And so it's about working through that. It's about, I basically, there's a part of the book where I was thinking about rehoming him, and I just couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I just couldn't. But I got that in order to fix him, I had to not fix, because that's not really the right word.
Sure.
I had to treat myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had to improve myself. And so I went into a deep dive about recovering as much as I can from that. And I would never say that I'm the person I was before all those things happened. I'm not. But I know how to, I know when it's coming. I know how to manage it, So it was a very different, very personal book. But again, it's the same line of comparing people and dogs, which I seem to be obsessed with. So.
Well, Patricia, I mean, we appreciate that you have that obsession and that you've been able to produce so much just amazing information. And it's just, I mean, I know I love the other end of the leash. I know Jackie did too as well. But even as a non-dog owner, I felt exactly what you've been saying. I understood the science behind a lot of it. I understood the genetics and the evolutionary history. I loved how the anecdotes sort of brought it all back together. It was just a great research / storytelling book, which is my favorite kind of science education book, because it feels like I'm reading fiction when I'm reading nonfiction, because there's so much storytelling there. So I really loved it.
First of all, thank you very, very much. And the fact is, one of the things I actually write about, and I think For the Love of a Dog, or I don't know, somewhere, is that's part of who we are as a species, is we love stories. It's integral. Anthropologists talk about it being sort of one of the primary, it's integral to us as a species. We are a storytelling species. If I was naming us, I would say Homo storyteller. Some Latin version of that. So I'm just like you. I love to read nonfiction that has stories in it, the same way. So thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. But I think, to your credit, the book's been very popular. I will say that. And it's very, very gratifying. It still sells amazingly well, frankly, for a book that's been out that long. But you in your field, your passion is behavior, right? So yeah. So don't you find that whatever perspective you get on behavior somehow enhances what you know in your own more narrow field?
Oh, it's very true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like to be too simplistic about it, but behavior is behavior. And while certainly there are going to be exceptions to exactly what behavior, when you're not talking about a human organism, you're still talking about patterns and principles, and there are still things to figure out. I mean, and again, not to be too simplistic, there's a lot more to it than that, as we've talked about. But that's at the core. That's at the core of everything that we all do. So
yeah.
And one common feature that we noticed while we were discussing the book is a lot of the points that you make about how we should react to our dogs should be how we react to people, right? Mm-hmm. We shouldn't be staring them like dead in the face.
Right.
Them, right? We should be respecting people's personal space.
We shouldn't be hugging everyone we meet, Jackie.
Right.
That's my problem. Right. That's my problem. But yeah.
But I'll bet you don't, you probably don't have hypersociability mutations. I mean, you probably don't go up to strangers on a busy street and throw your arms around them.
Not usually.
I don't know. Now that we can get out again, Jackie might be in hug overdrive, I think.
It's been a long year.
Jackie, I am a hugger too. So when we meet, we will run to each other, as if in slow motion, like in a movie, And
it will be long and a little
long. Yes. Yes.
Well, Tricia, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. If listeners would like to go to the website or purchase books, read your blog. I know you mentioned it, I think, on one of the posts that at the beginning of every month there are a lot of dog pictures, or I think you're trying to put a lot of dog pictures online. There are always a lot of dog pictures. I post every week on a Monday. The notice goes out actually Tuesday. So thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, it's just go to my name, patriciamcconnell.com, and there's my blog there. Yeah, the books are there. There's also a learning center that I'm really proud of. It's all free. There's tons of information. You can just, search for particular interest and field. And so, so thanks for mentioning that. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening to this bonus episode of ABA Inside Track. Big thanks to Dr. Patricia McConnell for coming on the show and giving so generously of her time to talk with us all about writing the book, as well as her career as a certified animal behaviorist. Like Dr. McConnell said, if you'd like to learn more about her and her works, go to patriciamcconnell.com for more information. And again, if you want to hear us discussing the full-length book, check your feed for the Other End of the Leash preview. If you haven't subscribed, maybe you should, or go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track to get instant access to the full-length episode at our premium $10 level. All right, we'll be back very soon, I think, with another full-length episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye!